In April 1789, George Washington stepped into the office of president with a nation still fragile and uncertain. He faced enormous challenges, massive debt, unsettled territories, and political divisions threatening to pull the young republic apart. The Constitution was untested, and every step Washington took would shape traditions that still endure today.
Washington's inaugural address set the stage, as he called for unity and respect for individual rights.
He chose the humble title, Mr. President, rejecting grand honorifics like Your Excellency. Washington appointed the very first cabinet, Adams as vice president, Jefferson as Secretary of State, Hamilton at Treasury, and Knox at War. Even Adams was confused. Was he vice president or simply president of the Senate? The role had no clear purpose. Washington also gave shape to the judiciary, establishing district courts and appointing John Jay as the first Chief Justice. But perhaps the greatest demand was for guaranteed rights, protections for liberty that the Constitution had not yet defined. Thanks to Madison and Jefferson, the Bill of Rights was introduced in 1789 and ratified by 1791. During Washington's presidency, 3 new states joined the Union: Vermont, Kentucky, and Tennessee. But the Northwest remained unstable, where native nations fiercely resisted American expansion. Determined to assert control, Washington dispatched General Josiah Harmar to subdue resistance. Instead, Harmar's forces were crushed in 1790 at the Battle of Kekionga.
Survivors recalled the horror. One could walk across the river on the bodies of the dead.
A year later, Washington sent General St. Clair with a much larger army.
On November 4, 1791, St. Clair's men were ambushed by over 1,000 native warriors under Little Turtle. The result was catastrophic. Over 600 Americans killed in the single worst defeat by native forces in U.S. history. Washington blamed St. Clair for the disaster, furious at the failure of leadership. For the first time, Congress launched an investigation into the executive branch, but no one was held accountable.
Instead, the defeats pushed Congress to expand the army and strengthen militias nationwide.
Washington's choice of Alexander Hamilton as Treasury Secretary would prove one of his wisest decisions. Hamilton set out to organize America's chaotic finances, beginning with the nation's massive debt.
He consolidated state debts into a national debt to establish American credit.
To raise funds, Hamilton issued government bonds, tariffs, and new taxes.
He also founded the U.S. Mint, standardizing American coinage.
To win Southern support, Hamilton struck the Compromise of 1790, moving the capital south in exchange for debt reforms. This deal paved the way for Washington, D.C. to be established as the new capital. Hamilton's crowning achievement came with the creation of the first Bank of the United States in 1791. The bank managed national debt, issued loans, and stabilized the young nation's economy. Critics like Thomas Jefferson denounced it as unconstitutional, but Washington sided with Hamilton. Hamilton and Jefferson clashed bitterly, representing 2 competing visions for America. Hamilton and his allies formed the Federalist Party, supporting a strong central government. Jefferson and Madison countered with the Democratic Republicans, who favored states' rights and agrarian values.
When the French Revolution erupted, Jefferson's Republicans embraced it as a sister movement.
Federalists, however, saw it as violent chaos and feared its radical influence.
Every major issue in Washington's presidency sparked fierce battles between the 2 factions. Frustrated, Jefferson resigned as Secretary of State in 1793, but he remained active in politics. Partisan newspapers fueled the divide, intensifying the nation's first political rivalry. Washington, though siding with Federalists, lamented the growing bitterness tearing the country apart. By the mid-1790s, America was already divided into warring political camps that would shape its future. One of Hamilton's most controversial measures was the whiskey tax of 1791. Many frontier farmers despised the tax, evading it whenever possible.
In 1794, matters turned violent when tax collectors were attacked in western Pennsylvania.
Washington refused to allow rebellion to undermine the new federal government.
Invoking new militia laws, he mobilized an astonishing 13,000 troops to crush the uprising. Washington personally led the army into Pennsylvania, the only sitting president to command troops in the field.
The rebels quickly melted away, unwilling to face such overwhelming force.
Unlike the chaos of Shays's rebellion, the Whiskey Rebellion proved that the new government had real strength. That same year, U.S. forces also triumphed in the Northwest at the Battle of Fallen Timbers.
The resulting Treaty of Greenville secured U.S. control over the Northwest Territory. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, the French Revolution erupted, dividing American opinion.
Jefferson and his supporters celebrated it as a continuation of America's own ideals.
Federalists, however, feared it was a violent, reckless upheaval. When France and Britain went to war in 1792, America was pressured to take sides.
France's envoy, Citizen Jeanette, urged Americans to honor the old alliance and join their fight.
But Washington resisted, declaring neutrality in 1793 to keep America out of war. Jeanette defied Washington, recruiting privateers until the president demanded his recall.
Ironically, Washington spared Jeanette from execution in France by granting him asylum.
In 1794, Chief Justice John Jay negotiated a treaty with Britain to resolve disputes.
A year later, Pinckney's treaty with Spain secured navigation rights on the Mississippi.
His policy of neutrality became a cornerstone of early American diplomacy.
By 1796, Washington prepared to step down, setting the precedent of a two-term presidency. In his farewell, he warned against political parties dividing the nation.
Yet partisan conflict had already taken deep root in American politics.
He also urged unity, reminding Americans that their strength lay in national solidarity.
Another warning was against entangling alliances, encouraging America to remain neutral abroad.
His decision to relinquish power showed the world a leader who valued principle over authority.
Retiring to Mount Vernon, he lived out his final years in quiet dignity.
His legacy endured as the father of the nation, shaping the presidency for all who followed.
Washington left behind a stronger republic, tested but resilient.
Through triumphs and trials, Washington defined what it meant to lead a new nation. George Washington took office in April 1789, becoming the first president of the United States, stepping into a role with no roadmap. The Constitution was new, and Washington had to put it into practice while facing crushing debt, Western conflicts. He created the first presidential traditions, delivering an inaugural address, and choosing the simple title, Mr. President. To manage the government, he formed the first cabinet: Adams, Jefferson, Hamilton, and Knox. Even Adams admitted he didn't know the role of vice president, calling it the most insignificant office ever created.
Washington also shaped the judiciary with the Judiciary Act of 1789, creating federal courts and appointing John Jay as Chief Justice.
The lack of guaranteed rights worried many states. Washington supported Madison's push for a Bill of Rights. But while rights expanded, violence erupted in the Northwest Territory, where native confederacies resisted U.S. expansion.
Washington sent General Josiah Harmar in 1790, but his campaign ended in disaster at the Battle of Kekianga.
Determined to try again, Washington sent General Arthur St. Clair in 1791 to subdue native resistance. But his army was ambushed by native forces led by Chief Little Turtle, suffering a devastating defeat. Over 600 American soldiers were killed, the worst U.S. defeat ever at the hands of Native Americans.
The shocking loss led Congress to investigate the executive branch for the first time in U.S. history.
No one was punished, but the government expanded the army, increased pay, and required all men to serve in state militias. Amid military struggles, Washington's administration found success in economic reforms, led by Alexander Hamilton. Hamilton consolidated state debts into a national debt, introduced new tariffs, and established the U.S. Mint. Southern states resisted, fearing too much federal power, but Hamilton struck a deal known as the Compromise of 1790. In exchange for supporting his financial plan, the new national capital was placed on the Potomac River, future Washington, D.C. Hamilton's boldest move came in 1791, with the creation of the Bank of the United States to manage funds and issue banknotes. Critics argued the bank gave the federal government unconstitutional powers, but Washington approved it as essential for survival. While Washington favored Hamilton, deep divisions soon split his cabinet between Hamilton's Federalists and Jefferson's Republicans. Hamilton and the Federalists wanted a strong central government and commerce, while Jefferson's Republicans defended states' rights and farming values. These rivalries deepened as the French Revolution erupted in Europe, dividing Americans over whether to support France.
Jefferson's Republicans embraced it as a continuation of liberty, while Federalists feared it was violent chaos.
Washington worried about political rivalries tearing the nation apart, but the divide only grew stronger after he left office. Meanwhile, Hamilton's new taxes were unpopular, especially the 1791 whiskey tax, which farmers saw as unfair. In 1794, protests turned violent in western Pennsylvania, escalating into what became known as the Whiskey Rebellion. Determined not to appear weak, Washington personally led nearly 13,000 militia troops to put down the rebellion. The sheer display of force was enough. The rebels scattered without a major battle, proving federal law would be enforced. That same year, American forces won a decisive victory at the Battle of Fallen Timbers, ending the Northwest Indian War. The Treaty of Greenville soon followed, with native tribes ceding much of Ohio to the United States.
In foreign affairs, Washington resisted pressure to support France in its war with Britain, fearing disaster for the fragile U.S.
In 1793, he issued the Neutrality Proclamation, keeping the young nation out of European conflicts.
This angered France but paved the way for diplomatic successes, including the Jay Treaty with Britain in 1794.
By 1796, Washington chose not to seek a third term, setting the precedent of peaceful transition of power.
In his farewell address, he warned against political factions and foreign entanglements, advice echoing through American history.